Hi everyone, Jeff Hall, and I'm standing behind 12 North Main Street in the Graniteville section of Westford. And if you've driven by this site any time over the last few years, you probably looked at it and said, my God, what a terrible eyesore. But there's hope for this in the future. There's hope that these buildings can become a very attractive feature to this area of town. A task force was organized a few years ago to work with Assistant Town Manager John Mangiarotti to develop a plan not only for the cleanup of the site, but for the use of it in the future. The first portion of this stone building behind me was built in 1859. It was run by the Abbott Company. If you look on Broadway Street, the C.G. Sargent's building that was built in 1877 is there also. Those were major employers of the people who moved into Graniteville. Of course, the quarries on Snake Meadow Hill were also major employers for whom Graniteville received its name. Immigrants from Canada, Europe, Ireland, and England were recruited to work these mills. But it really got its start in the mid-1800s when the Stony Brook Railroad was built, and that ran from Groton Junction, which is now the town of Ayer, into Lowell. Manufacturers C.G. Sargent and Francis Calvert at the time moved here from Lowell in 1854, seeing potential as a result of the railroad being built. They actually started in a mill and farmhouse on this site. When a fire destroyed the original buildings, they moved upstream, constructed a dam, and built these buildings, and that's when their businesses took off. Well, that gives us a bit of the history of this building. Now let's go back to the studio and find out what's happening today and what lies ahead in the future. Hi everyone, we're back in the studio with John Mangiarotti. John is our Assistant Town Manager and is the head of the task force for 12 North Main Street. John, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I grew up in Graniteville. Still consider myself a Graniteville boy, even though I've lived in Forge Village. So this particular site is of particular interest to me, myself personally. But I know it's of great interest to the community. People have driven by there for the last several years, and it's become an eyesore. And where does it go from here? Tell me, John, how and why did the town get involved with this project?
Okay, great. Well, first of all, next time you're out there, please let me know. I'd like to join you. I thought I was going to make it over there. That's why I'm wearing my work boots here today. But I go over there every week to check in on things. It's a great town building that we now own. Mm-hmm. How we came to own it is around 2005. The business that was there, Westford Anodizing, went out of business or left. Yeah. And around 2010, the owner having not been able to sell it, stopped paying taxes. Okay. And so it went through the tax title process, and it was hung up there until just last year when the town foreclosed on the property through the tax title process. Okay. Why does the town have an interest in it like that? The town came into this project and developed the task force because of the severe disrepair that the building is in. It sits very close to the street and to the sidewalks, and it's also next to a dam and the Stony Brook, which leads to our water supply. Two of our water supply wells are right downstream. So there's a lot of reasons why the town wanted to step in and make sure that this building didn't get any worse. Okay. We did everything we could to encourage the prior owner to make the building safe and make the necessary repairs, but it wasn't able to come through with it. So ultimately, the task force recommended to the town that we foreclose and retain ownership and start working on a plan to preserve it and protect the public. Tell me a little bit, you mentioned the task force, and these are the people behind that are working on this particular plan. Made up mainly of Graniteville residents, am I correct? Yes, we're fortunate to have great involvement from the neighborhood, the Graniteville neighborhood. We also have Economic Development Committee members, Housing Committee, okay. Board of Selectmen. Okay. We also have someone from the Planning Department, the Board of Health, and we have the finance committee member. So we have a very diverse group, and we have very heated and productive deliberations. And we meet twice a month, and we had a very busy year, including getting town meeting approval for projects and trying to determine what the extent of contamination was on the site.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. It was on the market for, I'm going to say, 10 years. And the previous owner didn't have much luck. And the concern I know always was, what do you call it, a 21E, a hazardous waste site?
Yes.
Or brownfields? Am I on the right track
yeah, I mean,
here?
the prior use of the building was Westford Anodizing, which is metal plating, and before that, it was some other industrial manufacturing, and then going back then, it was
Fiber materials before that,
right.
yeah.
So there's a lot of opportunities for issues to come up with environmental in the building and in the area around the building. The Mass Department of Environmental Protection did soil sampling out there and determined that there are some areas of soil near the building and near the incinerator that's closer to Stony Brook that are contaminated and need to be cleaned up.
The incinerator, is that little thing in the back that looks like a huge oven that you'd cook on or something like that?
Yeah, it'd be a great thing to have in your backyard
Yeah.
for backyard barbecues, but apparently they used it for burning trash.
Okay.
So that created some contamination in the soil and the ash from the burning activities that happened there.
Yeah.
And so the state actually put a fence around that until we can take further action to clean it up.
Okay, so there's potential, some actually hazardous waste cleanup that's going to have to be done in order to go forward. But the site itself, I mean, you talked about it being next to the Stony Brook. You've got the dam there with the waterfall. I mean, when the area is cleaned up, I mean, you can just envision this is going to be a very attractive area. Should have the potential for someone coming in and say, geez, this has great potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was always a big part of the Graniteville neighborhood. This mill complex was a vital part of the neighborhood. We have two other mill complexes on the Stony Brook that have already been renovated and are beautiful examples of what you can do with these historic mills.
I live in Forge Village, and I mean, Abbott Mills has made a huge difference there in the work Chris Schuler's done. And you're talking about the other one,
Brookside,
which is,
right.
Yeah, Brookside. And so there's two examples of the potential that they have. Both of those are brick, though. This is different.
There's some brick on here. This granite is actually very unique because the quarry right across the street is where it all was mined from.
That's why they call it Graniteville, John.
Yeah. So it's a beautiful building. It's strong. The walls are very strong. We have some concerns about the timber between the walls, which is why we're doing some work this winter to try to stabilize it.
Talk a little bit about that. The town meeting and just appropriated some money.
Yes, the Community Preservation Committee recommended the town meeting $378,000 to do stabilization of the mill building, and the town meeting voters approved it, which we were very pleased, and we're starting the work hopefully next week.
Okay.
January 4th, sorry.
January 4th, yeah.
Is when we're starting the work, and we're going to take the 80-foot smokestack and knock off the top 4 courses of brick, which are failed.
Okay.
And then we're going to stabilize a lower portion of the chimney with huge 6x6 timbers strapped around with wire. And that should keep the smokestack up there for a while the town decides what else to do. The next part of the project, which will hopefully start shortly after, is to go into the building and stabilize the floor beams by putting posts at the midpoint of each span, which is going to be a difficult project, but the contractor that we selected, Campbell Construction, is a great company. They just finished work on our historic Westford Academy at the Town Museum.
Okay,
And, so we're looking forward to working with them on that.
As a president of the Historical Society, I can vouch for them. They did a terrific job there. I guess the concern, John, if I'm correct, was that after last winter, for example, with the snow and the ice that we had, and the floors, if the floors collapse, then the walls would collapse. Am I correct? Is that the concern?
Yes.
Okay.
So the purpose of the work that Campbell is going to do is to support those floor beams at the midpoints to make them stronger, And once that work is done, we're also going to go in there, hopefully this spring, and remove a lot of the roof debris that is sitting on top of the floor, which is also adding to the weight. So if we stabilize the floor and then get the weight off of it, we feel that the building will be strong enough to stay up for a while, even without a roof.
Okay.
And while we determine what's next for this building.
Okay. That's the granite building, all right? That's
Yes.
the one on 12 North. There's a huge wooden building behind that that was the old Rustlick building. Is that part of this?
No, that's it was historically part of the mill complex, but at some point in the last 30 years, the ownership split up. So the town took ownership of the 12 North Main Street granite building, and then the parcel that makes up the driveway, the parcel that makes up the incinerator, and so just those three parcels. The parcel that the Rustlick building sits on is actually owned by a private entity called Urban Design and Development.
Okay.
They also own the part of the property that abuts River Street.
Which would be the old warehouse building, am I correct?
Right.
Yeah.
So they own a few of the parcels, and the town owns a few of the parcels. So we're looking at the whole mill complex
Yeah.
together, but it's owned separately.
Okay. So, but there's been discussions along the way with those people.
Yes, the task force has met with the owner
Yeah.
and tried to incorporate him in our planning process, and we're trying to really understand what his plans are for the site to make sure that we coordinate as we move forward.
Okay, good. So you see this, John, potentially as not just 12 North Main Street, the granite building, but possibly all of that site together. Am I correct?
Well, our task force was charged simply with looking at what to do with the 12 North Main Street building,
Okay.
which we've been doing. But in doing that, we were recognizing that anything that happens there would be very difficult to follow through with without involving the other parcels that are in close proximity. So our recommendations will likely include coordinating with those other property owners in some fashion.
One of the areas is the dam and a waterfall that comes down, which produced the energy to run the mills in the 19th century. How stable is that? Is that in good shape, the dam?
We actually had a dam assessment completed earlier in 2015 by Weston and Sampson, and the report from that will be published in early January. There weren't any issues that were alarming that they had to bring to our attention immediately, so I think they're just going to be recommending some maintenance and minor things. So overall, I think it's in good shape, and it is a portion of the 12 North Main Street building sits basically on top of the dam structure, and at that point, it seems to be all in pretty good shape as well.
Okay, yeah. I mean, we were down there walking around the site and seeing that, and I'm saying, geez, it's once again, when you look at it, you can see the potential in this area. And you're right. You said earlier that Abbott Wisted, which was used there, and C.G. Sargent's, these were the center. I mean, that's Graniteville grew up not just with the quarries, which the village was named for, but C.G. Sargent's, which built the building down the street in 1877, and this building, which was run by Abbott Wisted and C.G. Sargent's for years, were the major employers. I mean, you went from 50 people in the village or 30 people in the village prior to the building of the railroad going through to over 300 to 400 people in the village in 30 years' time. And that's how the village grew up around these. John, the future. Okay, so we get the area cleaned up. The town appropriates the money. They're coming down there with cranes. They're going to stabilize the building and the area. They're going to take the junk out. It's all going to be nice and cleaned up. Where do we go from there?
So that's going to be the interesting part. Well, it's all been interesting, but that's going to be the challenging part. So once we're able to put the building in a position that we know it's safe and stabilized, then they're going to really focus on what to do next. And,
Okay.
the task force has looked at multiple scenarios for reuse, and we're continuing to do that, and we're doing more analysis this spring. One of the things that we need to look at is what's feasible there. Some market study may be necessary.
Okay.
And we need to look at what potential town uses this building could serve. There are a few suggestions out there as a park or as a town building,
Okay.
but we need to determine whether it would be better served by having it developed privately so that private developers are able to take advantage of tax incentives and other incentives available to them that we
Similar
wouldn't have.
to what we saw in Abdassa with the Brookside Mills and the Abbott Mills in Forge Village. Similar to that.
Well, I see a better parallel. Brookside Mill is a closer parallel because the town actually owned the Brookside Mill at some point
Okay.
through tax title, just like this mill. And at that point, they issued an RFP for a developer to develop it in a certain fashion, and they awarded them a contract, and it happened.
Yeah, okay.
So the same scenario could play out here at this mill, where the town puts out a request for proposals based on certain parameters, preserve the building, for example, provide access to Stony Brook for the public, other things that the task force and the selectmen want to incorporate in a future project, and then developers would come back with plans, whether it's a housing, whether it's mixed use, whether it's commercial.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, could you see commercial development coming in there? We'll say a dentist's office, a lawyer's office, and maybe housing to go with that. A restaurant. I know that since the village store closed in Forge Village and Parrots closed at Graniteville, those meeting places that the villages had basically are gone. And I know that the Economic Development Committee came out to Graniteville and Forge, and one of the things that was mentioned at both of those meetings was, how about a restaurant? How about a place to have coffee? Yeah, could you see something like that going in
I
there?
think it would be great if that could be incorporated into the plans. I'm not sure if a restaurant on its own could support the redevelopment of that site,
Yeah.
but I think if that can be incorporated somehow, I think that would be a great benefit to the neighborhood and the community.
Yeah. What do you see as the biggest roadblocks going forward, John?
Well, I think there are a few challenges to this site. The split ownership, where the town owns one piece and the other owner owns another piece, and how we all would work together to do something. The condition of the building is a big challenge. I think the work that we're doing this winter will stabilize it and help it from falling down, but there will still be significant investment required to get this to a shape that can be used for occupied. There are soil contamination that needs to be addressed around the building and down close to the Stony Brook, and that's very expensive. We're hoping to get help from the state with funding for soil cleanup, and our state representative was successful at our state center in getting it in the 2014 environmental bond bill.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about that, John?
Sure.
Try to
So-
be, I know, and it's complicated, I know that, so let's try to put it in layman's terms.
Sure. Basically, the Representative Arcero and Senator Donahue helped get it on the environmental bond bill. Governor Patrick signed the bond bill shortly before he left office, and now the task is to try to get the administration to release the funding. And I understand that a lot of projects are included in bond bills that never get funded. So we acknowledge that, but it doesn't mean we're not trying as hard as we can to get that funding released. And our task force has worked very hard. Our state representative has invited the Secretary of Environmental and Energy out to the
Yes,
site.
yeah.
He's walked around. Jody Ross, our town manager, convinced Secretary Ash to come visit the site when
Yeah.
he was in town for another event. So
Yeah.
we're trying to get attention at the state level for this building and how important it is to the neighborhood and to the community, and we think for the region as well. So if that funding comes through in some fashion, it would be a great help to get this property into a better condition for potential resale or reuse. If that funding doesn't come through,
That's not a deal breaker. I mean, if the funding doesn't come through, we still move forward. We don't just say, well, hey, listen, we didn't get the funding, so we're going to forget about this site. No, we're moving forward.
no, we're still
anyway.
going to move forward. It's just going to take a different path.
Yeah.
There are other resources that we'd look to for funding, or we rely on it to be taken care of through the sale,
Okay.
and rely on the buyer to take care of it
Yeah.
as a condition of sale.
One of the things that you talked about is, and I mentioned potential roadblocks or stumbling blocks. You mentioned a few, but the economy's got to be part of it as well. I think if you had gone through the same process in 2008 that you're going through now, I think it would have been a lot more difficult. Am I correct?
I think so. I mean, the building wasn't in terrible shape in 2008 and was for sale. And I think, part of the reason that no one bought it was a difficult time. And so now that the building has, the roof has fallen down, we're doing this now. And I think the economy has improved, but I think there's still a lot of reasons that people aren't jumping at the chance to buy this mill. But we're hoping to change that.
Do you know if there's been any interest at all? I mean, has anyone come in and said, "Geez, I'm looking at this mill"? I mean, is that?
Yes, we've had people that there was a gentleman interested in trying to buy it to turn it into a demonstration site for a hydropower technology that he developed.
Would he use the entire mill complex?
We haven't heard from him in a long time, but his initial proposal was to buy the whole thing, fix it up, and use a portion of it for his purposes.
Okay.
We issued an RFI, which is a request for information.
Okay.
And to try to see who was interested in developing the site if the town were to put it out.
Yeah.
And we received 2 responses.
Okay.
One from a firm who was interested in using it for housing.
Okay.
And another from a firm who was interested in using it for small, light industrial rental space.
Okay.
And so there was limited interest, but I think once we make these improvements and stabilizations, I think it'll be in a better position to get more interest.
Considering what we've seen statewide, and particularly in this area, you look to Lowell, look to Lawrence, as two that were areas where you had old mill buildings, and you saw them develop. You see them, Granville, Forge Village, and Namnasset. But there's, I guess, we're more creative now than they were 50 years ago. I mean, these places closed. Abbott Mills closed in 1956 and moved out, unless someone moved in right away. But there seems to be other ways of doing these things now. There seems to be more of a focus on using these old buildings than tearing them down, right?
And historic preservation is a big part of
Sure.
what interests me about my job as the assistant town manager, and every opportunity I get, I take to try to save buildings. And I think the public has a similar feeling. I think they recognize what this building meant to the town and to the neighborhood, and I think even though there are a lot of challenges that will be in front of us if we try to save it, I think tearing it down was not something that many people even considered.
Yeah.
I mean, it was definitely brought up and discussed, and we understand what it would cost, and it would be close to $2 million to tear it down, and I think that.
And then what do you do with it?
Then what do you do with it? Exactly. So, I think saving this building and see what some creative person can do with it, I think would really help out.
Well, it's funny how attitudes have changed, Sean. If you look back at the master plan that was put out in 1969 for the town of Westford, which would have been 46 years ago, okay? There was recommendations in there to do 2 things. One, what is now the town museum, okay, is being used as a fire station. And they talked about tearing that down and building a new firehouse, which eventually was built, but the building was preserved. The other they recommended tearing down Town Hall as well.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And in 1969, no one blinked an eye. So historic preservation has become much more important in the last 30 years or so. And as you said, you see it as a major part of your job, correct?
I like to think it is. I'm not sure if it's in my job description, but
Yeah.
I make sure
But
it's a
you've taken
priority.
on that
It's
task.
a priority of
Yeah.
mine because I think it's
Yeah.
important to have a sense of what this town was is for now and for residents in the future to recognize some of these important parts of our community, like this building.
Well, as a historian and president of the Historical Society, I appreciate the work you and the task force have done to make sure these things are preserved. And very quickly, that's not the only building. What's the other one you're looking at right now?
Well, I'm looking at quite a few, actually. Are you talking about the town
Town
farm?
farm, yeah.
The town farm is another old building which is very unique, and the town is in a position where we need to decide whether to invest significantly to restore the building, or what else we can do with it. Our rec department is in there,
Yeah.
and they're looking for a new place. It's not suited for them. So the task force recently, there was another task force called the Town Farm Task Force, which I was also a part of.
Well, we'll save that for another show, John. How's
Okay.
that sound?
I like it.
Listen, thank you very much for coming on.
Thank
and
you.
good luck.
Thank you very much.